evening and welcome to the March 17th Selectmen's meeting. Call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Don Klein, present.
Wayne Miller, present. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Notice that the meeting is being taped tonight, actually not live, so this will be on YouTube, I assume. Chairman's additions, deletions, Jim?
Yep.
Just on the updates and stuff like that. Public comment period. R1 public? Got nothing? Okay. 2.1, a little bit late. This is a delayed start, but 6:15 interview with police chief vacancy and with interim police Jace Artel. So, welcome.
All right, let me sit there. Am I good here? Perfect.
Distance away.
Excellent, yeah.
So we did get the report from the police screening committee that we put together. I reviewed that today.
I did too.
Okay. Do you have any questions on that, Don?
No, I understood.
Okay. I thought it was good too. So very comprehensive, very thorough, good report. I'd like to thank the committee for their efforts. I don't know if you had any feedback from the process.
I really enjoyed it. It was a good conversation that we had. It's stuff I like to talk about anyway, so it was no heavy lifting there. I had an enjoyable experience, very professional, very good questions. It seemed to understand the issues facing the profession, but also facing the town. So I was very impressed.
So, yeah. Questions, Don? Do you want to start?
Yeah, given the fact that you haven't had the opportunity, even though you've been here for a while, to address the general public, could you give us kind of a background on you know, your education, experiences, and that kind of thing coming into Townsend?
Sure. First and foremost, I'm a father of two children, both high school age, so that's got its challenges presented itself. On a professional level, I've been a police officer or been in law enforcement for about 25 years. I actually started at the state's prison in New Hampshire. I got on the road shortly thereafter, probably 2-3 years later. Worked at a very small town outside of Manchester, and then I transferred down to Hollis, New Hampshire back in 1997. In Hollis, New Hampshire, I rose through the ranks there. While I was on the job, I went back to college. When I was hired at the state's prison, I just had a high school education, high school diploma. Got all my college degrees on the job. I subsequently, in Hollis, as I was getting promoted, went back to grad school. Graduated in 2010 with a master's at Boston University. I've had a plethora of experience there. It's very similar to Townsend in the sense that as you get ranked there, you become in charge of a multitude of jobs. So I like to say I've done pretty much everything that police department had at some one level or another, from carrying or overseeing animal control operations all the way to running our regional dispatch center there. So did quite a bit there. I served my last 7 years as chief of police there before I came here about 2 years ago, I think in November of 17. Hollis and Townsend are very different, but similar in a lot of ways as well. Populations are a little bigger in Townsend. The infrastructure of Hollis was a little bigger, given we ran a regional emergency communications center. It dispatched to 3 towns, Mason, which is next door to us here, Brookline, and Hollis at the same time. And the chairman of that committee that oversees that dispatch center is the chief of police generally in the town, and I did that for the time that I was chief there. So I really learned a lot when I was there. Coming up through the ranks, I certainly spent my time on the road, went in, did a number of investigations, ran our prosecutorial wing for a number of years. That was also in charge of investigations, and certainly promoted up and through admin and overseen our efforts to try and get national accreditation, which came to fruition right as I was leaving. We were finally getting ready to put that to bed. That's a very difficult but honorable process. And very thorough. It's an inspection of your agency from stem to stern to make sure that you meet best practices on a whole host of fronts. There's internal audits, there's external audits, they do ride-alongs, Q&As with the public. It's a pretty well-established program. It really taught me a lot about best practices in the industry and how to meet those best practices. So since I've been here in town, I hit the ground running under Chief Bailey, and we had some heavy lifting to do, not the least of which was replenishing our fleet, both of men and of vehicles. We were down a number of spots when I've gotten here. I think at the last time I did the math, I think I've hired 25% of the officers that you see working here now. That's how depleted our ranks were. So there were a number of challenges that we faced internally and externally. I think we've done a good job of trying to address them. But I think the main overarching thing I think we did was provided some much needed stability to the organization, both on a fiscal level, but also on a staffing level and in a service delivery level. So I've enjoyed my time here. It's been very intense. It's been very difficult. I see that it's going to be difficult even still in the short term. But I think I see some good things happening. We're definitely moving in the right direction. I feel good. I think the men feel good. I think the morale is good at the department. I think we see a brighter future for us, certainly from a staffing perspective, but also from a best practices perspective. You take a lot of pride in your agency when you know you do it right, and you do it right based on a national model or a national standard. So I feel as though we have support to move in that direction. I feel honored to be given the opportunity to at least discuss that with you.
Okay. What are your top 2 or 3 challenges or objectives if you were to get the job?
I think policy, both design and promulgation, and I think that goes hand in hand with looking at accreditation at the state level. I think that is a great need for us because, again, it is a stamp of authority, not just based on your staffing and your town, the town fathers that exist in your community, but rather how do the experts around our state and further around our nation kind of view policy. And this is an ever fluid thing, changing. So I think policy promulgation would be number 1. I think getting our staffing to a point where, 1, it's full, and then 2nd, that it's stable is an important component of facing our department, certainly. And then 3rd, I think, is just kind of strengthening the foundation of the department where you build from the ground up, which is, looking at our budget from a cost perspective and analysis, in a sense where we work toward building a department that's funded to deliver the services that the townspeople expect. And I am 2 years into that, but it is a learning curve, and I'm learning a little bit more every day. Now, there's issues with our facility in itself, there's issues with equipment, with staffing, that whole thing. So I think that 3rd budget component would be up there as well. So it's hard to kind of prioritize them, because I think all 3 of them can be in first place depending on your mood. But certainly those 3 things I think are large as we move into this coming year anyways.
One of the things that is, at least for me, is a hot topic is retention of people. What do you see as the most challenging thing to retaining people? And a second part to that is getting them trained to move up in the ranks.
Right, I think that question is a very difficult one to answer because I think there are macro and micro variables here. I think there's macro variables in our profession in general, just of being a police officer in anywhere in USA. I can tell you from my own personal experiences, I have an 18-year-old boy who I'm not exactly enthused about motivating him to become a police officer. I'll be very frank. And he just even today made mention about he loves this department or that department. And while I'll never throw a wet blanket on my son's aspirations, I can think of a lot of reasons why not to be a police officer in 2020. And this has been going on since probably about 2013 at Ferguson, Missouri. There's a lot of people will point to as the touching point. So our recruitment and retention very much is at the mercy of the national mood towards policing in general. And I think we are in a resurgence period, and it's up to us in the profession to kind of rebuild that which makes somebody proud to serve and proud to be a part of a police department. But I think there's that challenge, which is a very difficult one to overcome. I used to always say it was kind of a 3-legged stool. People loved you, which was a great reason to be a police officer. It was very, very looked upon very favorably by people. The benefits were better than what you would find in the private sector. And then, gosh darn it, we had the best retirement. Well, if you look at all 3 of those things, we have gotten whacked in all 3 of those different areas. So that 3-legged stool is now on the floor. So for a lot of reasons, it's becoming challenging at the macro level. At the micro level, at our individual department, we suffer from what a lot of small towns suffer from, which is newer guys coming up, get into it to have fun, to be a part of something big, and they don't oftentimes see the job for what it is on the way in. They can be wooed by the big cities easily about all these specialty units and things of that nature. So there's some local challenges. That is one of them, the size of the agency. The other one is you look at the pay and you look at the benefits overall over the course of a career, not just on the way in. That, believe it or not, is a topic I hear quite a bit from 25 and 26-year-old guys coming through the door, which I did not see even as recently as 10 years ago. I think there's been a lot of advertisement about that, a lot of publicity about that surrounding thing. So I think those are some of the challenges that we face. As far as the training component, I think we use training to keep our people, because I don't think you can have a conversation about recruitment without having that same parallel conversation about retaining the people you have. A conservative estimate of cost to get a guy from working or coming out of college to answering a call on his own is probably around $100,000. And that's probably a pretty conservative figure. So when you think about that, if you are churning through those people, even on a tri-annual basis, it probably would have made more sense to give them extra and or provide some sort of incentive for them to stay. So when you look at that and you try and step out of it and say, okay, from a non-cost perspective, what can you provide? Well, you can provide a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. So when you're working in a career development kind of plan, and you had mentioned that as in your opening question, you can throw training responsibilities at that officer that he likes. And you learn that over a period of time of judging their work product and that type of thing, engaging in conversations about what would you like to do in this job? Where does this take you? Are you one of those guys that is a real good gun guy, or you guys really like the investigative kind of component of the job? And then try and match up their duties and their training with those interests. And then as they get a little older and they get a little more wise, they realize if you moved from this department to another, you may not get those opportunities. You may not have the opportunity to run that division in our department. So sharing some of those admin duties with the line officer, I think, is intricately important from two perspectives. One, let them keep them because they like to do it. It's something that they're enthused to do. But also, you're preparing them for leadership in the future. I always looked at it like, I'm basically just a steward for my position. I got to make it better when you come and become the police chief. That's my job. And I think everybody has to think that. One of the things I instituted over the years was a continuity binder in each of the positions of the department. I stole that from a guy that was in the Army who worked for us. And that was every post in the department would have a continuity binder which would detail the duties of that post, kind of like what you would see in the Army. What forms do we use to run that division? If you're a sergeant, what forms do you use to adequately assess your people's performance, that type of thing? What letters do you use? What are the step-by-step instructions to do this duty or that duty? And I think if you have those in your agency, throughout the agency, you can cross-train easier so that when you're stuck doing that job because so-and-so was hurt, injured, left, retired, or something like that, you're not starting from a blank piece of paper, which oftentimes happens way too often. So that's, I think, some of the things you can do and some of the challenges that we are facing. We're not alone in that, that's for sure. We are competing. One of the hard things about where we are is we are competing with towns that are in our greater area that are a lot bigger and pay a lot better. And the thing that we can never lose sight of is we are paying people, we need to pay people at a rate that they can live in the community they serve. That was always a challenge for me in Hollis. How the heck can you do that? You guys can't live 25 miles, 30 miles away from where they live. So you're competing with a labor market, not just other towns your population size. So you kind of got to broaden the scope of that. And I know the Collins Institute did a good job of finding comparable communities, but those are some of the challenges that I think that face us even here now, and then I think will always face us. Recruitment is an ongoing issue. Every Monday I pull out a folder that I have of people that have sent in resumes and cover letters, and I'll look and see when's the last time I contacted each one of them, and I'll send out emails and correspondence just to see if they're in the market. And that's even if we're fully staffed. Because when you start a process, it's incredibly difficult to get the numbers that we used to get in the late 90s or even early 2000s to come to be a police officer. We did a very good job. The last big recruitment effort we had here, I think we had almost 100 people by the time it was done. It took a lot of work to get there, but you do have to do it all the time, even when you're not actively looking for people. It's not something you can get caught short-sheeted or on your heels with, to be sure.
I know we're talking of getting an update later, but one of the big things, the other hot topic number 4 would be the regionalization piece of it, because I know I can't remember how long ago we went with Devon's 16, so it's going on 4 years now. I think both of you have learned a lot since that, so how do you see that making it, the challenges that we've had with Devon's, how do we make that successful if we do enter into Ashby town, Pepperell?
So I think you have to, well, first I think you need to operate under the precept that we need to deliver effective police and fire and EMS services today, not just in the future. So we have to work with what we have. And, Donald Rumsfeld used to say, you go to war with the army you have, not the one you wish you had. So I think it's important to continue to have a good relationship with Neshoba and have a partnership and have them as teammates in the room, because again, every day that we are in that district, we are drawing those services and we are paying for a product. And we have to be mindful and vigilant that they are providing us the product that we expect, and more importantly, that our townspeople expect. So I don't think it's much of a difference really, quite honestly, if we were in Neshoba or if we went to a regional dispatch center, in so much as terms of relationship with the dispatch center. I think a regionalization presents a whole host of challenges, not the least of which is familiarity with your local customs. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of Neshoba, is they've got 7 different challenges. Just to give a good example of that was, I allowed officers this week, effective yesterday, to take a vast majority of our complaints over the phone, so that they do not have to come into contact when not necessary. Well, when I wanted to get Neshoba's piece on that and make sure that they're gonna take the information necessary to return calls, make sure you get as much contact information as possible. As we were having that conversation, there are other towns within that district that are gonna have dispatchers actually take the report over the phone. So it just goes to show, in the 7 towns, you could have 7 wildly different approaches to something. And we're gonna talk about this, I think, probably later on. But one of the benefits of a smaller government of it is those decisions are made quicker, and they are made in more jointly when you only have 3 people at the table rather than 7. And I think 7 is actually probably a short number, Mark, when you consider all the other agencies that are involved. I always say 7 because I think there's 7 police departments.
You know, seven towns, you
Right.
have 14 agencies and then a couple others, like
Ambulances
state
and
police that
stuff.
are monitored, so we have 15 or 16.
So trying to get herd all those cats together can be an enormous challenge. So I don't think there's much of a difference in how you approach running a dispatch center or interacting with a dispatch center. But I think the benefit of building it from the ground up is really our real opportunity here as far as getting a better service from Neshoba. But that being said, I will work as hard tomorrow as I will 2 weeks from now to make sure that what we're in now works effectively, because I depend on that greatly. I could have an officer in the woods right now, I could have an officer being hurt, we could have a fire, we could have an ambulance. So we are it's an everyday occurrence, really, where we're interacting with the administration over there to make it better. So I do think that there are a lot of benefits to going to a regional dispatch center on our own, but in the short term, it's very important to continue to collaborate and view them as colleagues and as very much teammates in the delivery of services.
One of the questions I had is, most positions I've ever had, one of the questions the interviewer always has asked is, what are you looking for to get out of this position that you're going for, and what are you looking for from us to help you accomplish what you're looking to get done?
Sure, yeah, I learned a long time ago, this is not a job you can do by yourself. And I learned, and I was talking to my daughter one time, and we were somewhere, and she said, I mentioned I made a smart remark about, I think I'm gonna take tomorrow off. My boss is a big guy, he'll agree with me, making a joke like I'm the boss, And she asked me that, she said, well, are you the boss? I said, no, really, you're not. And I think this is absolutely true. I think as you get promoted in an agency, you realize you have more bosses. And when you get to the top spot in an agency, your bosses are the 9,000 people in the community that you have. So thinking of it that way, and that's kind of the context and the way that I look at it. So what I would want from my bosses, and I think you by extension representing those people are my bosses, would be support and be a good teammate. And I will make my intentions clear that I intend to be a good teammate as well, and help craft the vision as to what you think your constituents want from a department when it comes to values, what they want when it comes to enforcement efforts, those types of things. It's collaborative in nature. I operate under the precept of the consent of the governed, and I derive my power from that. So I need to understand that, because the support of the town is really the gasoline that drives the motor of the police department. So understanding that we're meeting the needs, their enforcement needs, their service needs, is a key component of the job, and I think it's all hands-on-deck type of an approach when you want that. So I think support, which I have felt very supported since I have been here. I felt I've had ample time and opportunity. I've had coffee with everybody that sat in your chair, obviously, over the time, and got to understand each other on a personal level as well. Support is how I would sum that up as to what I would like. Assistance and help and guidance, I think, are the other things that come to mind when I'm thinking of it that way. when you ask me what I'm looking to get out of the job, I get fulfillment from doing a job well. To be very frankly, it doesn't really matter what that job is. I've always felt that way even since I was a young boy. I get fulfillment for doing a job well. This is a very important job. I find it to be the obligations to be overwhelming at times. This is a very important job to society. It's critical that in order for our society to run in an orderly fashion and our children are educated well and are safe. So I take that obligation very, very seriously. So I get fulfillment doing that job really well. I can't tell you how much. I would take a lot less money as long as I'm doing the job well and I get that sense of fulfillment. I've never done it for monetary reasons. I like a job well done. So support and guidance and a good teammate is what I expect.
I really don't have anything more. I think you've covered the big questions I've had. I reviewed the questions that were asked and answered during the meetings, and you and I talk all the time during our liaison meetings, so I'm pretty up to date with what you got going on with the department and the direction of going. I mean, you covered a lot of that with the answers that we've given tonight, so.
I think, yeah, I had just one other one. I know I've been asked by a number of people. I kind of think I know what the answer is, but I'd like to hear Jay's answer, and is why, having come from a chief's position in another community, why did you come here and take what literally was a step back?
Well, there's a couple reasons. First is I'm able to, I'm retired out of New Hampshire, so I draw a retirement check, is one. So the second reason is me being in the Commonwealth, I do another 10 years, I am qualified to retire in the Commonwealth as well. So there are some monetary reasons that make that very attractive. The second reason is as I'm looking at Ascension, and I'm looking at Ascension at Halls PD, time wasn't exactly right. I probably would have liked to have stayed there for another 3 or 4 years for Ascension planning purposes. The guy that replaced me is a fantastic guy. He was ready, albeit a little earlier than we had expected. But when I looked at what do I want to do in retirement, and am I ready to retire? My accountant says it doesn't make a lot of sense to stay in that position when I can qualify for a retirement where I can draw the benefits of that retirement and go seek employment elsewhere. So if I looked at it that way, well, what would I want to do? What I want to do is what I was doing. And where can I do that and make sense? Well, 5 miles from my house, that's a pretty attractive thing to have happen. I don't have to uproot my family, I don't have to go across the state, I don't have to go to another state. I'm originally from Massachusetts, so it kind of fits. We go to church here, we've been members of the community for a decade now anyway. So all those things kind of fell in place right. When Rick had asked me if I was interested, I really poo-pooed it at first, to be honest, because I wanted my children out of high school before I started thinking about my post-retirement job. But the opportunity was so good, I thought it was a good time to act. I'm familiar with the town, obviously being a church member here, going to St. John's for a number of years. Spent a lot of time in town, so I understood the construct of the town. Again, 5 miles from my house, I don't have to uproot. So it was as little disruption as I possibly could have on that front. So by no means did I look at it like a demotion. I looked at it as we got into an environment where I had a teammate that we were looking to rebuild a department and get a department headed in the right direction, with the ultimate goal of becoming chief if it was possible. So the whole process has got me to a point where I understand I'm not done yet. I have a lot of policing left, I think. I'm fairly young in that regard. So it was the stars aligned right, maybe a couple of years early, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. So the short story is I am retired from New Hampshire, a straight up ordinary retirement. So I'm able to kind of monetize the job for the best way you possibly could. Not an unusual thing, and having it so close to my house is just a godsend.
Some questions I have.
Okay. I guess the next steps we discuss at some point.
It's really your call. You can deliberate. It's public session. There's no executive session privilege for it, so your deliberations will be public, and they could run the gamut from like what we heard and would like to move forward with this candidate to like what we heard. But maybe there's somebody. It's always that. I wonder what's on the other channel. I like what I'm watching, but there might be something. So between those two poles.
Okay.
And timing of that could be that you go home until your next meeting and just, ruminate, think about it. Or it could be that you feel comfortable this evening to, to say you're ready to move forward and pending negotiations of an acceptable agreement, you'd be willing to make the offer.
I do have a couple of questions for you before we get to that point, I think, so I'd like to, maybe that we may wait until our next meeting, and then deliberate.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. Just because I want to be prepared for the next steps, and I do have a couple of things that popped into my mind today that I want to make sure we cover, that you can discuss with him separately, I guess.
Gotcha, gotcha. One thing, if I might, I didn't hear Jay talk at all about kind of the external network that you have developed, not just with local chiefs, but more specifically as far out as the IACP and the roles that you've played there. Just, I mean, it's easy to look at a small town chief and think, this is a small town chief. But particularly in Jay's case, and I won't say, I'll let you talk about it.
Sure.
But he's reached out well beyond that in terms of his network.
Sure, I found that networking is critical in any regard, in any job you're ever gonna do. And a number of years ago, I started to participate in the International Association of Chiefs of Police. First as just a conference attendee, and eventually was approached by someone that sat on the Community Policing Committee, and asked if I would be interested in lending some ideas to that committee. I was eventually appointed by the president of IACP to sit on the Community Policing Committee for a term of 3 years. The committee is comprised of 30 members of chiefs around the world. It's been an extraordinarily fruitful adventure. I've met chiefs from all around the world, Africa, India, Japan. I mean, it's really kind of interesting. The main charge of the committee is, one, to promulgate community policing programs and to judge an annual community policing award that's offered at various population levels. And it's really allowed me to steal a ton of ideas over the years, to be honest with you, and opened up my eyes to what's going on in the country on a national level. When my term expired, generally IACP has you do a 3-year term and then move on. I had some projects going on within IACP, so I was asked to enter into another term. So I'm in my second 3-year term of that committee. It's also allowed, and it's also kind of provided me with opportunities to be on the policy council of IACP, which is a pretty decent resource as well, which is a kind of a one-stop shop almost. Boilerplate kind of policies are promulgated from a policy council. They provide best practice and model policies for agencies and position papers and white papers and that type of thing. It's really given me a good look at a national snapshot of our profession in general, and certainly be able to take that back to our agency. So to Jim's point, I think networking is critical, and I think bringing those ideas back to your agency, it makes a huge difference. One of the better programs that I brought back and stole was interacting with the special needs people at the high school, and they had a program in Hollis where people with some significant learning disabilities wanted to create a trade environment almost, where they would go to a local business and apply for a job in a mock interview setting, and then perform some sort of job over a period of time, and interact with a boss and have a performance evaluation in the whole shebango. We did that with special needs children at the high school for a number of years, detailing our cruisers, and one was a janitorial staff. And things like that really got us into that realm and into that community. It's really helped exponentially our relationship with the special needs division of the school, which is enormously important when you're looking at juvenile delinquency techniques and mitigation techniques and stuff. So, mitigation is a huge part of the job, and the more community contacts you have, the better off you're able to do that. So yeah, networking is a huge thing. And I've tried to extend that now in Massachusetts. I've joined the Massachusetts Police Chiefs Association here. It's been a great resource through this COVID-19 crisis. I can tell you they provide a lot of information. We do not operate in a vacuum. This is very much a regional endeavor, a state endeavor, and a worldwide endeavor in this law enforcement job. It really is quite profound.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Well, thank you for
You're welcome.
helping us. I know it's a challenging time right now for everybody to have face-to-face meetings, but I didn't want this one to slip as we go through, so we'll be in touch, I guess. I got all my real interviews and. All right, 3.1 appointments. Appoint Carol Hofses as the the Associate Member of the Planning Board. So this is from last week.
This is, we had a bit of a hiccup last week. This was on the agenda, had been voted by the planning board. Just as the meeting was beginning last week, a member of the planning board leaned forward and indicated that this wasn't gonna be necessary to take up because she, the member that was speaking, was going to be stepping down, and the applicant for the associate's position was going to be running on stickers to fill that soon-to-be vacancy. No sooner did that happen than some phones were lighting up in the audience, and I did speak to the chair of the planning board as recently as today about making certain that this got back on, because it was a vote of the planning board, and it should not have been acted on any differently than it was presented.
So this is correct.
This is the correct thing to
Okay.
have.
Can I get a motion, please?
And it's Hops, is that right? Last name pronounced, Hops?
I would say Hopses.
Hopses.
Hopses? Okay, thank you.
Okay. I make a motion that we appoint Carol Hopsis as the associate member to the planning board effective March 17th, 2020 to June 30th, 2020.
Second. Any discussion? Good. I had a question, and this came up in our meeting yesterday, is if there is no election, can these terms go beyond this? Are there appointments that we have to do beyond that, or?
There's a discussion actually taking place, at the executive level in the Commonwealth right now about that. What happens for the continuation of government if elections are pushed or postponed?
Okay.
The general rule of thumb is you serve unless and until replaced. That doesn't generally occur when it's an elected position. It's more when there's an appointed position.
Sure.
So they are looking at that, but the MMA and the governor's office are working on getting some of that information within a couple of weeks here, because we have elections coming up.
Okay. Good. Any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
3-2, Thomas Hall's full-time firefighter paramedic.
Make a motion that we appoint Thomas Hall as the full-time firefighter paramedic for the Townsend Fire EMS Department, contingent upon the passing of a medical exam and a Cory check with a 1-year probationary period.
Second. Any questions? No? Welcome aboard. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 3-3, appoint James Hamill as constable. Can I get a motion on that?
Make a motion that we appoint James E. Hamel as the constable for the term effective July 1st, 2020, June 30th, 2023, contingent upon the receipt of a constable bond to be on file with the treasurer collector.
I'll second that. What does that entail, Jim? Constable?
It's just performance bonds, because they do have process serving rights, so it's an insurance protection basically, because you're giving them authority to do those
Okay.
things.
Questions?
Nope.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 3-4, nominate for appointment John King as the animal inspector. Can I get a motion?
Make a motion, we appoint John King as the animal inspector for barn book inspections in accordance with the Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 129, Section 15 and 16, effective May 1st, 2020 to April 30th, 2021.
I'll second. Questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
3-5, nominate for appointment Mary Letourneau as animal inspection.
I make an appointment, we appoint Mary Letourneau as the animal inspector for quarantines in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 129, Section 15 and 16, effective May 1st, 2020 to April 30th, 2021.
Second. Questions?
Nope.
All those in favor?
Aye.
3-6, appoint Kim King to the Townsend Meeting Hall Gallery.
Make a motion that we appoint Kim King to the Townsend Meeting Hall Gallery for a term of...
That's committee, I guess, is the missing there. What it says on the appointment.
Okay, it doesn't say...
No.
But it doesn't, okay. Yeah, appoint Kim King to the Townsend Meeting Hall Gallery Committee for a term effective March 17th, 2020 to June 30th, 2023.
And I'll second. Any questions?
No,
Didn't know we had one of these, but,
yeah.
you know, what is this for?
What is a gallery?
They actually, When the building first went into operation, the meeting hall in between the senior center and the library, the gallery committee was put together. There's an art rotation that goes on regularly, so each time you're over there, you'll see a different presentation of artworks. They are the curators of that artwork and those presentations. They manage, to a certain degree, that facility as well. So there is an art gallery committee policy that exists in the Selectmen policy books that talks about what their specific roles are. I'd be happy to get a copy into your boxes tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, sure. I like what they do over there, it's pretty cool stuff they have.
Yeah, that is.
Sometimes. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-7 to appoint Karen Provost to the Townsend Meeting Hall Gallery Committee.
I make a motion, we appoint Karen Provost to the Townsend Meeting Hall Gallery Committee for a term effective March 17, 2020 to June 30th, 2022.
Second, any questions?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting business, 4-1, MRPC study for regionalization of dispatch communications with Ashby Pepperell, and I assume that's why our esteemed gentlemen are here. So,
Yes, sir.
have at
That's the case.
Where would you like to start? I can start with a quick overview of what got us here today.
Sure.
So, as Jim alluded to earlier, about 3 to 4 years ago, the comm center, Jay wasn't here yet. Comm center was struggling and we were looking at options. The board at the time, board members at the time were interested in exploring regionalization. The decision was made to go to Neshoba. I was part of that decision. We met with the director at the time, which was Nathan Kinney, and a couple of chiefs, a police chief and a fire chief that came over and did a public session about the center, and we were convinced it was a good thing to do and that they were an up-and-coming center that had established themselves for about 4 years, so it wasn't brand new, and they had worked out the kinks. So, including myself and Chief Eaton was here at the time, we made the recommendation as public safety officials that it was the right thing to do, and we signed on. It wasn't long after that things started to come unravel, and it became clear we were trying to be as professional as possible, but sold a bill of goods. The director was more or less forced to leave. The transition for us there was very, very difficult. They were in debt, $640,000. There was no policies, procedures. The director had basically told everybody what they wanted to hear. And with 7 towns and 14 different agencies, there was basically 14 different sets of policies and ways to do things. So, as Jay said, and I'll probably say this repeatedly, we do our best to continue to work with them. But in 2018, July of 18, I believe, I'm not sure if Wayne was on the board yet, but the decision was made to explore regionalization of Ashby, Pepperell, and Townsend. Jay and I and Mike Grimley were appointed as representatives from Townsend under the Mass General laws there's actually provision in the laws to explore regionalization. 3 officials from Ashby were appointed, 3 officials from Pepperell were appointed, and we started this exploration. The study that you have in front of you was sort of the one, we agreed to do it, paid for it, had it done. It's, as you can see, it's very comprehensive, about 120 pages, which is way more than I expected. Jay and I will be happy to answer whatever question you have about the study. In a nutshell, it says regionalization with Ashby and Pepperell is the right thing to do. David Branch is available. He is the author or co-author of the study, and he's made himself available tonight via phone. So if you have any questions in particular about the study that we can't answer, or he's probably better to answer it than we are. He's available tonight if you so choose.
Okay.
MRPC orchestrated this study. We worked with them. They funded some of it. We funded some of it. Karen Chapman, who's a member of MRPC that was part of it, is also available for you to speak to tonight via phone if you have any questions about how the study was conducted. you know, the process that was followed, basically the procurement process. So, unless Jay's got anything to add, that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, you know, I think the move to have such a comprehensive study was an important one. And what I think one of the things that the chief and I were actually very firm about was we wanted it done by an objective third party and not have the 9 of us make a determination of what was best without some objective set of eyes on this. And it really made a huge difference as far as what I see. You have those other 2 towns that have a vested interest in regionalizing. You know, we have our own, and we didn't want the specter that we wanted it to go one way or the other. So it took us a long time to secure the funding through our MRPC. We were able to get it under the wire for that grant. And then we all 3 of the towns kicked in a pretty sizable amount of money to get this study before you. So again, I do think that if you do have questions about it, because it is fairly substantive.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to go through the.
That the author has availed himself if we needed to get you some more information.
But I was impressed with the amount of detail it went into, and it wasn't just hey, we looked at this and we're gonna do it.
Yeah, I've been through this twice now, and I've had conversations with Mark too. A couple of things that rose to me, and first of all, I want to say to both of you is I'm pro regional communications. I have been for a long time. I've seen it work in other parts of the country, and there's no reason why it shouldn't work here. And I will say, Mark, that when we went to Neshoba, there were a number of things that I saw being on the outside, and having gone through things where you've done, brought a number of organizations together and tried to fit them and tried to get their policies in line. You have to get that done up front before you do the merger, because if you don't, you're setting yourself up for failure. And I think that wasn't totally completed before you made that move. That being said, is that I looked at this from 2 things. That one is, I looked at it from my perspective, is this the right thing to do? When I'm going through, when I'm reading this, and as I said, I've gone through it twice. I have to agree. I think the study was done appropriately, and I think I love the fact that the 4 quadrants that they used were right on, were spot on. The problem I see is that if you're explaining this to the general public, that a couple of things stood out to me. One, if you looked at it from the individual communities, Pepperell and Ashby, yes, this is a benefit for them in a number of ways, including financially. If you look at it from Townsend's perspective, outside of the governance piece of it, it doesn't look to me, and I don't think it would look to the general public, that this is the right way, because one, you're not increasing, or it's not improving, I should say, based on what I've read here, it's not improving your response. People are still gonna get an ambulance, they're still gonna get a police cruiser, they're still gonna get a fire truck. There's an additional cost for the people in Townsend, the initial cost. But one thing that I didn't see in here was what is the long-term cost benefits. And I'm after our conversation, I think that's what you're looking to do in step 2, correct? That being said, knowing some of the issues that have cropped up over the last several years where you are today, I can see why there's a possibility that there could be serious consequences down the line, given the training and stuff that goes on over there, and the turnover they have in personnel is what I see as part of the problem. The other part of the problem I see today is that I don't think that you have the appropriate feedback that you need to get, that you don't have the director doesn't have the responsibility of making the changes needed based on what you're telling him, that it has to go through the admin board first. And I don't think that's the right way to go. I think the admin board should be there as a policy, helping develop the policy going forward. But the operational side of the house, how the director does things, how you respond, and getting the other communities to get on the same page should be, that director should be reporting to the operations committee. Unfortunately, that's not the way it is. But, going back to this study, if I was looking at this as a general public, I would say, I don't see where this is the appropriate thing for the town of Townsend, because it's not getting us any benefit. We're gonna pay more money, at least at the outset. So explain to me where you see this going, and what's the next step that it would show us where the cost factor is going to benefit us.
And I think that's what we're looking for from you, from the Board of Selectmen. Okay, the first step, as we saw it, was, is it feasible? And we've done that through a third party, yes, it's feasible. The next step would be, with your permission, in the appointment of us, I've got the language, but basically we were given the authority to carry this all the way through if we would. But at this point, we're saying, okay, here's a study, what's the direction you want from the board? My personal opinion is the next step for us is to, okay, now dive into what this is gonna cost. We haven't really, the study talks about a snapshot in time of hypothetically, if, the other towns joined Neshoba, that we would see a reduction. Well, that's not gonna happen. Ashby's already signed on with Pepperell. They're gonna be dispatched by them July 1. And you know that, because it was in the news. So it was a snapshot in time, but we really don't know. We haven't delved into that minutia and that stuff to figure out, okay, what is the cost? My hope is that it would be a net zero, that it would cost us nothing to go there. Because understandably, as a taxpayer myself, not here in this town, what's the benefit? Well, the benefit that we see, or I see, is we would get, in my opinion, an increased quality of service. And I don't wanna get into the weeds about what we're experiencing over there, but there are significant issues that we don't have through the current governance, as you said. We don't have the mechanism we don't have the voice to fix it. So we would gain a better quality of service. And my hope would be that we would dig into the minutia of this and find out that it's gonna be at a net gain of zero, that would cost us the same amount of money. But we're not there yet. We don't know that.
Yeah, and I
We
think
also
that,
don't know what the governance would look like. We have a draft, because we've had some discussions. We haven't dug down and come up with a final version of this is what the governance would be. I can tell you the governance proposed is, as mentioned in the study, is it would be equal say between the three towns, and it would be split cost between the three towns. But we haven't refined that we're not at the point where I can say, this is what it's gonna be. That's the draft at this point. We're looking for the nod for you, do you want us to, nope, we're not moving forward, make it work at Neshoba, or do we wanna continue moving forward? And I certainly would like to hear Jay comment before you make that decision.
One of the things that strikes me, and as I was writing some bullet points down as you were talking, Mr. Klein and Mark, stole a lot of my thunder, but I think I start from the context of what's the overall goal, and at the end of the day, the overall goal is the net benefit to public safety. That to me. So I would never try and sell this as a cost savings measure. I'm not so sure you would ever get there. Looking at the tea leaves and looking down the road, this is an increasingly expensive field. Technology advancements, it's harder to find people, total employment. You're seeing their collective bargaining agreement adding raises left and right. So I'm not so sure you'd ever succeed selling it as a money saver. When you look at a net benefit to public safety though, in the model that they recommended, their framing element, they gave it a 4 out of 5, 5 being the top score. So if you said, okay, we'll pump the brakes a little bit and let's just, what do we, having a 2-year job interview with Neshoba, and Mark having much more experience with Neshoba, what do we think that, even with our, sweat on our brow, where do we get Neshoba to? Do we ever get to a 4 or 5? I'm suspicious. And the reason I'm suspicious is the very thing that you said that we do get a benefit on, and that is the governance. And what is the governance of an agency? What is the governance of a bureaucracy? It's the basic framework. One of the things that we're having very difficult time with is the massive bureaucracy that it is, and it is not very nimble to make very fundamental changes that the fire chief and I have recognized for a number of years. There are a number of things going on to their defense that they're trying to address. Our issue is, look how long it took you to get here. And as this field, which is a very fluid one with technology, with training, with software, looking down the road, if that's what we can envision as change and how we get change accomplished in an agency, gosh darn it, I'm not so sure we ever get to a 4 or 5 there. The bureaucracy that you mentioned is a significant one. And again, this is not something that's happening in a vacuum. These conversations are taking place both at the admin level and at the ops board level about moving forward, how do we do that? But I'm not speaking for you, Chief, but I've heard him say on a number of different occasions, I'll hear one thing and then 5 minutes later I'll hear that same person argue something completely different. So I'm not so sure that there's a consensus as to which one of those boards should emerge as the boss of the communications director. And that is a major issue, and the longer it takes to make that assessment, the longer it takes before we're able to fix some of these fundamental issues. Chief alluded to some complaints that we've made about process and procedure and more or less field performance on dispatchers. And we've got a long road to fix those issues at Neshoba, who are dealing with those very same recruitment challenges that you and I had spoke to about earlier in the evening, Mr. Klein, at a much more difficult level. So I look at this as a net benefit to public safety. Okay, as of now, if we ever got to the 4, that's very good. I mean, you're almost to perfect, right? Would we ever get to a 4 or 5 with Neshoba, given its current state of affairs, where we really can't settle as to which memorandum of understanding is the real one that's in effect? I still can't have that question answered 2 years into this. I mean, I brought that up the very first meeting I went to. Are we operating under the MOU that the town of Townsend signed, or are we operating under the MOU that the first couple of agencies signed? Our sister community, Lunenburg, has a completely different MOU than ours. We're 2 years into this. How much work does that take to get 2 boards to decide which gosh darn MOU we're doing? And long-term, what does that look like? So I don't look at it as a cost-saving measure. I look at it as we need to look at the impact of public safety. So I think that there's 2 things that need to happen in order to kind of go down that road. The first one is a cost study of what we're actually talking about, so we can actually get real costs associated to some of these more foggy figures that we've talked about. Because I think they did a good job with the finances, but until you get really granular, it's tough to say. And then the second thing would be an action plan, a legit action plan about what steps to take to get to a point where we had the rec created and then we actually had a turn-on date. So I think that there's a ton of work, committee work, if it's something that the board wanted to explore where we could get more information. There's a lot of work in that. Let's not fool ourselves. No, but I think it's vital work, because I think you're exactly right. I can't tell from this what the actual cost would be to turn on the lights of that place.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we need to do for the next steps, because I mean, we're gonna have to go to town meeting, and you guys are gonna have to defend any
Yeah.
increase.
And that's what I was trying to get at is, the general public is going to look at the first 2 items. That's where they are. They don't see the governance part of it at all. And so how are you gonna sell this? I mean, I'm all for taking the next step. The one thing though that, in reading through this the second time, that I had a big concern is the fact that Pepperell would still have ownership of the center and the personnel. And while we may all be in agreement today, politics always rears its ugly head. At some point in the future, that could come back to bite us. And so part of what I would like to see is, part of the cost analysis, what would it take to have a standalone comm center that the 3 communities have jointly, and how would that look?
Yeah. Yes.
Just a couple overarching thoughts. I've intentionally not read the report yet, because I talked to the chiefs about it. I wanted to hear them present it. Things that I think touch on issues you've raised and the issues that both members of the board have raised that are, I think, the skeleton of what we need to use for aiming it going forward is, where's the state in terms of if it's going to be centered in Pepperell, using that PSAP, or if it's going to be a standalone, as Don just said, will they issue or transfer that PSAP? So what's the state's position just in terms of setting up an organization, whatever it's gonna look like, wherever it's going to be? That could be, in the critical path, a full stop, death, no, do not proceed, do not pass go. So, and I don't think that's answered yet, right? I mean, there's been some,
I think it has personally, because we've had a meeting, we've had Kate involved in a couple of meetings in discussing the IMA. So a couple of things come to mind of that, and we had a meeting almost 2 years ago now with the state. And there's the Master General Law, Chapter 6, which is the basis on Ashby going there. And it would be no different with us. And as that law reads, and as we've heard from the state, we've heard from Kate, and I won't pretend to be a lawyer, if the governing bodies make this decision, the state has no say over whether or not we decide. If 3 governing bodies say we're gonna join together as a regional center, that's exactly what that Master General Law is laid out to us. This is the process you follow. And nowhere in that does it say, and then the state will give you permission. It's, if the governing bodies make the decision, then it's a big deal. Now, would there be costs?
right, but that, just before you go to cost, that necessarily though directs us to the other points that Don is raising, which is what is the structure, where is it,
Right.
those types of things, so,
And that's also laid out in that law.
I understand. So we would be in Pepperell, we would be using Pepperell as the lead, we would have an intermunicipal agreement, you say IMA, with them as a customer of their organization. And if that's at the end of the analysis, the model that's chosen, then we have the right to do it. I'm not certain that that's the model that people want. I know you just raised the issue, politics does rear its ugly head. Is there another model? Yes, it's in the report, I would imagine, that talks about a standalone. At that point, the decision tree comes down. Is it a municipal agency? Is it a quasi-governmental agency? Is it a private nonprofit, that the towns each subscribe to? So, and then the state is eyeball deep in it at that point.
And not to mention, we have to go back to that meeting that we had 2 years ago, where they were very non-committal about what our costs were going to be to get out of Neshoba.
Absolutely.
They made mention of carrot and rod, and they were not shy at telling us we could get a big fat bill on our way out as well. And it doesn't seem like they're very motivated to provide anything in writing to give us any guarantees one way or the other. There's been some thought about that. That was a consideration that we made at the committee level throughout our discussions. And I think that that's part of that action plan, and in developing those true costs is answering some of those questions as to where does the state stand on, this is still a consolidation.
Sure.
It's still in keeping with their overarching mission. There are some grant opportunities that I still haven't seen in writing yet, but Director Clune had mentioned it at 2 different public meetings relative to fiscal '22 incentive grants that are substantive. I mean, they're significant in creating a new rec. So whether or not we tap into those or whether or not we will qualify for them, we need to, one, get the official notification what the grant actually says, and then get an expert to kind of look at the 2 and determine. So there's a lot of unanswered questions, but I think that part of the committee's charge moving forward would be nailing some of that down and nailing some of that stuff to the wall.
And I would defer to the technical expertise in having been involved in the work that was done to transition to Neshoba, but the state was taking it as a zero-sum game. We put X amount of dollars on the table for Neshoba, and if you go someplace else, that all stays at Neshoba. It's sunk cost, it's lost, but that's not necessarily the case. The redeployment of some of that infrastructure is viable.
Yeah, and it'll be a discussion that, again, it's details that we're gonna have to work out, and we're not at that point yet. Where Jay's right, they clearly said that we may be on the hook, for lack of better terms, for some of that cost. But they did say that it wouldn't be, we're gonna send you a bill for $300,000, it would be, okay, no matter what center you're in, you get 2 different grants. You get support grants, so they automatically get money to running the operation. And the more towns you have, the more money you get. They may dip into some of that over time, so there would be no cash out of pocket, so to speak. That we would lose some of our supplemental grant funds until they felt satisfied that we had paid them back. But the question of what are we paying them back is up for debate, because you know, we're still gonna use a lot of that equipment. You know,
IMC.
We went to IMC software.
And honestly,
We're
quite
gonna
honestly, I
continue
think the
to use
context of that meeting, and I think the three of us were there, I'm not so sure if Mr. Miller was there or not, but the kind of the context of the meeting was they were fearing we were gonna go back on our own.
Right.
And that's kind of a different thing when you look at it now, where, no, we're not going back on our own. We're not going against the grain. We're going with the grain, just we wanna do it our way, that makes sense for our locality, not as part of a larger regional thing, which may be against the grain, if that's ultimately what they want.
And I
But it
think
wasn't
that-
as bad as what they were saying.
I think the undercurrent in all of this is the fear of the failure of Neshoba as a rec. And if one person, one community bails out, will another, because they've invested significantly as the Commonwealth in that center. So I think part of the carrot and stick you talk about was definitely, you know, we're gonna dangle this threat that you're gonna have to pay back all that incentive money if you go. Probably not for any other reason, and they need to continue to prop up Neshoba until it is.
And the finances are, quite frankly, are a lot better. The finances are better than they were 2 years ago. If nothing else, Chief Boynton's work here has made that center much better, meaning Neshoba. There have been improvements made. There's no question about that, and they've just recently had an audit. I'm just digesting it now, literally hot off the presses. But it certainly did not come back as bad as what it was 2 years ago, when they didn't have a line item budget.
So
I think, let that sit for a second.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what we're talking about.
I don't wanna get too far into the weeds, but there are a couple of things that I do wanna point out, and I wanna come back to the governance piece for a second, but one of the big decisions we made when going there was they were gonna increase their staffing from 9 to, they were gonna increase 1 per shift, so they were gonna hire 4 more. So they would have gone to a full staffing of 14. They have never been at 14 since the day we started, and they're currently at 9, that's the same amount, because they can't retain help. So they've been under staffed all along. So they, as Jay said, they have the same issue. There's, you know, there's been huge issues that I don't wanna get into the weeds about that are still unresolved. But the governance piece for Ashby, Townsend, and Pepperell, we have to work that out, no doubt. And we need to be able to give you something in black and white and say, this is what it's gonna be. So I can only say that what we've decided on thus far in the draft that we have is that it would basically be an IMA that looks like a district agreement. And the district agreement is laid out in the law. If we were gonna create a district and say we're gonna put a dispatch center in Townsend, brand new, and all the 3 towns are gonna go there, we're gonna create a separate governing body, that we would have a board, we would have, all that's laid out, and that's some of the issues with Neshoba, not to digress back into that, is that there was no finance committee until a year ago. They've been in business for going on 8 years. That we would set all that up from the beginning. And the notion is that we're initially gonna set it up to be out of Pepperell, with the thought that someday we're gonna go to a neutral location that could be in any of the towns, but it's not gonna be in a police station or a fire station. It's gonna be an independent organization, so nobody has home court advantage. Now, obviously, that's gonna cost a lot of money. So the first step the committee is discussing is first joining together at Pepperell, making sure this works, work out all the kinks, and then at some point move into another building somewhere that's neutral.
And that's what I'd like to see, those 2 options,
Right.
Yeah.
moving forward, because, well, kind of 3 options. One, if we stay,
Right.
what are the long-term cost estimates? What if we go to Pepperell as is over there and make that work?
Right.
Or option 3 is the one you just laid out, having a separate piece. So I think the next steps in moving forward is that cost benefit, not cost benefit, but this is a little difficult to call it a benefit, because you're, I mean, the feedback I got
Cost
from.
analysis. Yeah.
Cost analysis, but the feedback that I've been getting from the community since we've gone over there is that they've lost that, call it small town feel, hometown feel, where I don't have to give, my car broke down in front of Cliff's.
Yeah.
I don't know Cliff's address, I never have, but, you know, somebody from Ashby, Townsend, Pepperell would know that.
Yeah.
So that's gonna increase your response time, that's gonna make everybody's life a lot better, so that's kind of what I'm going for with that. And I agree with most of the people I've talked to with this, looking at it. So if study's great, it's kind of exactly what I thought we would
The
get.
one thing I wanted to mention, and I wanted to mention it last, because I think it's something that needs to hang with us as we kind of wrap the topic up, is all of the costs that we're talking about, all the numbers that are contained in that study, all the numbers that are in this audit that were done, are based on the assumption that it's operating costs for a center that functions well. Well, it doesn't. So again, we do not have data points of cost to run that center effectively and well. What we're dealing with is we're dealing with one budget, very small sample, one budget of a line item budget where we finally got it to it so it's black and maybe recognized a little bit of a surplus, right? But again, we need to see a track record of an agency running properly, meeting its mission on a number of years before I'll buy that agency, before I'll spend, close to, at some point, it's gonna be, that $200,000 at some level. I mean, that's not far away. Before we bought that service, I'd like a track record that they do that service, they give us a very good service for that amount of money. And one of the things that always nags at me is when we look at Neshoba's costs, its current operating costs, we can't automatically assume that's the cost of effective dispatch services if you feel as though you're not getting effective dispatch services. So that's just something I think that is important as we're looking at these numbers. Not to think, well, that car doesn't run. So what good's the price tag of that car if the car doesn't run? Is kind of the similar argument. Now, it's not the end of the world, and again, as the chief had said, we're doing our best to make with it what we have. We have affected, and I credit Chief Boynton with a ton of change has been affected at both of those boards, but a long road to hope. But think about that as you're looking at the costs of Neshoba. Yeah, costs of Neshoba to run as it currently is, not necessarily as it should be, which may be a very, very different animal.
The distinction
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
cost and value.
Yeah.
So do you need a vote from us, or?
Well, I think the chiefs are looking to get direction as to whether or not they should delve into the next phase. What I have as a question is, what is that? Is that another independent study, pay a consultant to come in and do the numbers, or is that something that, because the independent neutral third party stuff is good. It's important, but it costs.
Where we
I think it's really up to the committee, because we're only 3 members of the committee.
And I'm not so sure the other 2/3 have the charge like ours. Our charge was fairly open-ended about this issue. Their charge, I think, was much more narrow in scope. So when we left our last meeting, it was, hey, everybody go back to your boards and see if you have the authority to move into the second phase. So I think it would be meeting for the first time and coming up with a basic charge of that committee amongst the 9 members, if that's the way that the board wanted it constructed.
My personal opinion is it would not involve paying somebody to do another study. I think there's enough knowledge in the room of the 3 towns to be able to figure out, we know what Pepperell's is. Ashby has been running a center, we used to run a center. I think we can crunch the numbers well enough, and we have the inside expertise. We don't need an outside expert to say, hey, this is gonna cost, but I'm only one member of the committee, but I'm not looking to spend a bunch more money to do more studies, but certainly I want to be able to, the opportunity to bring back all the information so you can make an educated decision and say, yeah, this is what we believe it's gonna cost. This is what we propose for governance. This is whatever else you wanna know, when we might be able to do this.
Okay. So a motion to authorize them to go back to their board to proceed to the next step?
Scope out the next step.
Okay. I make a motion that we charge the chiefs to go back to their committee and scope out the next steps.
I'm not second. Just one question, who's number 3?
Grimley. Captain Grimley.
Captain Mike Grimley.
Okay, just wanna get that out there. Any other questions, Tom?
As a side note, this may not be part of the overall scope of what the other 2 communities are looking for, but I think Wayne touched on it a little bit, is that the options, what are our options, and specifically making sure that you put in there what you feel or may not feel comfortable with as far as Neshoba is concerned. If you feel that there is a possibility that we can fix the problems there, and if not, make sure that that's part of what you put in here so that we can look at all three options.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I know this was a lot of work, so appreciate your efforts.
Yeah, and reach out to Matrix and to Karen from MRPC
Yeah.
and say,
Yeah, tell them
great
thank you very
job,
much.
great job.
There's a lot more than that, Karen.
They did a good job.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
guys.
5-1, work sessions, town administrator updates report.
Yes, two things, Mr. Chairman. One is, you may have received the notifications from the Alcohol Beverages Control Commission.
Yes.
So this is all happening at kind of breakneck speed for us, but the governor has, since we've last met, declared a state of emergency. What was at the state level, the directive that groups of people no greater than 25 meet at any given time has been further narrowed by the federal government as of a press conference yesterday afternoon late, where it's now the recommendation is groupings of no more than 10 people. Schools have been closed via that executive order by the governor for 3 weeks. Each of the adjacent communities to us have closed their town facilities to the public. We've now had a meeting of all department staff, department head staff last Friday, a joint meeting between your board and the Board of Health yesterday, and then a follow-up to fine-tune things with department heads again this morning. That resulted in the document that I presented out to you tonight for this meeting for consideration. This is a draft. If there's so much as a comma that you disagree with, I'd encourage you to say so. I'm gonna take a couple of minutes just to go through it, just so it's of record. So poke at me at any point as I'm going through this if there's something that you want to discuss in a little more detail. So it comes in under the Selectmen stationery and dated today, Dear Towns and Community. We understand the public, our employees and town committees, boards and commissions are concerned related to the ongoing news related to the coronavirus, COVID-19. Given the evolving conditions related to the spread of the virus, its inherent risk to the public, and to act in an abundance of caution for the community and our staff, the town of Townsend is closing all town buildings to the public, excluding public safety buildings, effective today. This decision will remain in full force and effect for 2.5 weeks through Monday, April 6th, 2020, at which time this access restriction may be adjusted or discontinued. The affected town buildings, though closed to public access, will be staffed during normal working hours and can be reached by phone or online. The senior center will continue providing transportation services and Meals on Wheels program in an effort to continue these essential services to the senior population. If the staffing situation changes, we will provide an update to the public. In regard to public meetings, we direct boards and committees that we appoint and encourage those that we do not appoint to postpone public meetings during this 2.5 week period, if at all possible. If there is a legal requirement that does not allow for the postponement, we recommend utilizing the open meeting law order signed by Governor Baker that allows for remote participation by all members of the public body. Stop and come off the document there. Right now, before this order, there was the ability to do remote participation, but you had to have a physical quorum present and in the location. The change that the governor has authorized now is you can have a meeting of a public body with a quorum of the body in different parts of the country. As long as they're able to hear one another and be heard, that would satisfy the open meeting law. So back to the document. We currently are researching alternative means of public access to these meetings, but for the time, we would not allow public access and would make a recording of the meeting available within 24 hours pursuant to the governor's order. So again, to come off the paper there, speaking with some of the adjacent communities about platforms like Zoom that would allow for kind of the bilateral communication. So we'd have the ability for public view, public participation. But that's not something we're prepared at this point to be able to do. So the governor's order does allow for remote participation, so everybody off-site, no public access because you would not be here for them to access so long as within 24 hours the recording is made available of the meeting as it was conducted. And this would be just for this period of time that we're talking about.
Okay.
All other public events will not take place during the next 2.5 weeks. This decision is being made to protect the health and safety of the community, our vulnerable populations, our staff, and to slow the transmission of the virus within the community. As this situation has rapidly evolved and is highly fluid, we will continue to provide updates to the public through the town website, town-wide email, and the local news media. Please continue to follow the preventive protocols issued by the Department of Public Health and the CDC guidelines, and we will continue to post updates with any new information. Sincerely, the Townsend Board of Selectmen. And then into some of the detail. The general action plan. All town buildings, with the exception of police and fire, will be closed to the public until April 6, 2020. All work-related travel, both foreign and domestic, is to be discontinued until further notice. Town employees are strongly encouraged to avoid any personal international travel. Conferences, seminars, and other discretionary gatherings scheduled and hosted by town departments involving external parties are to be held virtually or canceled. All non-essential board and commission meetings should be canceled or postponed if possible. And we are working to secure reliable technology to conduct statutory public hearings remotely. More specifically, employee and volunteer specific action plan. The virus spreads through droplets, so you are reminded to take the steps to limit the spread of COVID-19. Specifically, stay home if you are sick, avoid close contact with others. Cover your mouth when you cough or sneeze, use a tissue or your inner elbow, not your hands. Wash your hands with soap and warm water, or use an alcohol-based sanitizing gel, and practice social distancing. Try to stay several feet away from one another. Prioritize attentiveness to personal and workspace hygiene. We'll come back to that a little bit later. And what can be done electronically must be, and what must be done in person must be done with every effort to protect the health and welfare of the public that we serve, the employees and volunteers with whom we work. If you are symptomatic, have been exposed to someone who is symptomatic, or diagnosed, or have been exposed to someone who has been directly to someone who's been diagnosed, please do not come to work. As your health, the public's health, and the health of your coworkers is of utmost importance during this critical time. The best information available to us now indicates that older adults and people with chronic medical conditions are at the highest risk of serious illness. Employees in this risk group are encouraged to talk with their supervisor to review possible alternative work assignments. Side note on that, we have been dealing with that. We in the meeting as recent as this morning, we had conversations about some folks that will likely be working remotely from home, and they'll have access remotely to their desktop. All of these measures will be in place until further notice and will be reassessed and updated regularly as more information becomes available. If you have any questions about this, please speak with your immediate supervisor or department head. And then department-specific action plan. Accounting. The accounting department will remain open to all towns and staff members and will continue to provide all accounting functions. If required, the department does have the ability to work remotely, giving the department the ability to provide most accounting functions with the exception of printing accounts payable checks. If working remotely, be also available via phone and email to assist with any staff members' questions. And then the contact information for the accountant's office, both telephonically and by email. Treasurer collector. Payments to the treasurer collector may be made electronically through the town website at the link included by using the secure lockbox, which is affixed to the wall outside and to the right of the door at the rear of Town Hall, and via United States Postal Service. There will be no office or staff person in the building that will be authorized to accept your payment in hand, and we request that you do not approach a staff member asking that they do so. Contact information again provided. Assessors. Any business that a resident would come to the counter can be handled remotely via telephone, internet, or email, and again the contact information. Facilities. The Townsend Facilities Department will be undertaking the following efforts to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 virus. Twice daily efforts to clean the touch surfaces, i.e. doorknobs, counters, railings, etc. in town facilities. Deep clean with professional assistance, public areas where vulnerable members of our community may access. Suspend vendor visits. Limit public interaction during building inspections. Provide department heads with cleaning supplies pending availability. Deploy hand sanitizers at all building entrances. Please be aware that the ability to acquire sanitizers is extremely limited. Day-to-day supplies such as latex gloves, hand sanitizers, toilet paper, paper towels, sanitizing wipes are very scarce due to the public consumption of these supplies. The reading room, senior center, library, memorial hall are at risk of running out of these supplies currently. Side note there, the Inspector General's office has loosened some of the requirements for bidding and purchasing of these types of supplies during this period. So there is an effort being made through the Mass Municipal Association to create a clearinghouse, if you will, of these types of COVID-19 timeframe specific supplies for municipalities. Senior Center, effective immediately and until further notice, all non-essential programs and events will be canceled. Essential services that will continue include Roadrunner van service, so that would be for doctor's appointments. Meals on Wheels delivery, again, this would be for current Meals on Wheels participants as well as others that haven't used it in the past but wish to during this period. These are meals that are prepared off-site by mock that are then delivered by our personnel. They would be delivered, bless you, they would be delivered and left at doorstep with no physical handoff. Well-being check, phone calls, and other services. Staff members will be available Monday through Friday, 9 to 3, to make phone calls and provide services for patrons remotely. Regular contact with those who are immunocompromised or live alone, and the kitchen staff will work closely with mock to deliver meals to patrons who request them. So specifically, there are days where meals are provided on site at the center. What they're doing is working to convert those meals to actually be Meals on Wheels delivered to the homes as well. So they're working with mock. So if you get 2 of your meals a day on site at the center, that opportunity will be available for you to now receive them at your home. Updates will be posted on Facebook, the town website, and the cable station as necessary, and patrons will be informed of any pertinent information via email or phone call. A staff member will be in regular contact with Townsend Woods and Atwood Acres. We will keep in close contact with our public safety co-workers to identify residents who may need assistance. Townsend Highway Department will implement the following mitigation efforts: suspend vendor visits, limit public interaction on job sites, post signage at the office door restricting building access to business critical needs, provide public guidance on the website to interact with the department virtually by email and telephone, and to equip all department vehicles with hand sanitizer before use, during, and after working on job site. Public Library. The library staff will be undertaking the following actions in the interest of public safety. The library will be closed until April 3rd, 2020. All events are canceled or postponed until further notice, and all fines will be waived. So if you have a book and you're panicked because the library's closed and you don't find a way to get it through the book drop, the fine will be waived. So
And
don't.
specifically, I know they've asked not to drop off books,
Right.
so.
The plan will be reevaluated as necessary and may change at any time. There will be appropriate signage throughout the library indicating our temporary protocols. Land use, very specifically, the Community Development Block Grant Housing Rehabilitation process is well underway, with the grants administrator working out of the land use offices. So this is the contract agent that we have through Community Opportunities Group that is providing for the Housing Rehab Programs Administration. The program will be closed to person-to-person contact until April 3rd, 2020. Work that can be done electronically will continue. Contact information. Next, recreation. All recreation programs will be closed until April 3rd, 2020. Townsend Rec will be deep cleaning the rec center during that time. Additional information on their link on the town website. Town clerk, there are a great number of people who come into the clerk's office for services such as dog licenses, vital records, notary services, marriage licenses, voter registrations, and general information. Those services will be provided remotely. Make a phone call, and if necessary and legally required, there will be an appointment made. Water Department. The Water Department will be closed to the public until April 3rd, 2020. Please feel free to contact the Water Department with any questions or concerns. Contact information is provided. Fire EMS. Fire EMS has been monitoring and preparing for COVID-19 since the outbreak in China back in December. In January, anticipated shortages in medical and disinfecting cleaning supplies and placed orders for those supplies. All were back ordered, but we did receive toilet paper and paper towels a few weeks later. To date, we have not responded to a confirmed COVID-19 case. We have sufficient supply of medical gloves, masks, and gowns to protect emergency responders, but additional supplies ordered in January remain on back order. The Massachusetts Officer of Emergency Medical Services is working with the Department of Public Health and with suppliers to prioritize orders for emergency responders. We hope our back-ordered supplies will arrive, or the state will develop a cache so we can obtain supplies before we run out. All personnel have been reminded of the department's exposure control program for exposure of infectious diseases. Although COVID-19 is not an infectious disease, it is a virus The decontamination and protective measures are the same. EMS Coordinator Martin Scott is scheduled to attend a train-the-trainer course presented by Central Mass EMS Corp. On infectious disease on April 7th. The training will include dissemination of supplies to the departments in attendance. April is a few weeks away. Under the current guidelines and restrictions, this training may be canceled. We were able to improvise and purchase hand soap and bleach from a local store to make our own disinfectant if we run out. Due to the shortage of supplies, we have restricted the access to the medical supply office to the 7 full-time employees only. Although we value every employee, we do not want to run the risk of coming to work on a Monday morning to find out we're out of medical exam gloves or face masks. To limit exposure to emergency responders, our emergency response model has been changed. Typically, a routine medical call during the day, an ambulance and engine would respond. This response provides ample personnel to handle the call and the flexibility to make adjustments on the fly. If additional help is needed to remove the patient from the house and to treat the patient on the way to the hospital, the engine company helps out and a member or two jump on the ambulance for transport. If a second or third emergency call are received, the engine company can immediately respond and any remaining personnel at the station also respond. To limit the number of people exposed on routine calls, we are now sending the ambulance without the engine. When they arrive on scene, if additional help is needed, the crew will request assistance and another vehicle will respond. Neshoba Valley Regional Dispatch District Operations Board has been in contact with the dispatch director and discussed screening of calls, asking if patients have fever, trouble breathing, or cough. We're also discussing avoiding the use of, quote, exposure to coronavirus or COVID-19, unquote, over the radio to avoid public hysteria and flooding emergency service and public health with calls. The Operations Committee is scheduled to meet March 17th. There's been some discussion across the nation about quarantine of emergency responders exposed to COVID-19. We are expecting guidance from CDC and we'll be looking over that closely. Draft guidance documents indicate property protected emergency responders wearing respiratory protection and gloves are at a low risk and there's no need to quarantine. Responders wearing no protection and exposed to a patient for an extended period of time is high. The current debate is how long to quarantine. Current guideline is 14 days. Proposed guidelines we expect to see will be 30 days. In closing, as an emergency response organization, we have and will continue to respond to all calls for service, take every precaution to protect our personnel and limit exposure to the public. We will continue to monitor the situation and participate in conference calls with state officials and make adjustments as needed. We will be tracking all calls for flu-like symptoms, limiting our response and decontaminate the ambulance and equipment after every call. Police. As we see the number of COVID-19 cases increasing globally and within our state, we as law enforcement are doing our best to prepare for the likelihood that the virus will impact our community. As such, we have taken steps to alert our employees of the processes to mitigate risk recommended by the Mass Emergency Management Department and Department of Public Health and Centers for Disease Control. We're also reviewing and promulgating information found in a variety of plans issued both locally and throughout our emergency preparedness region. We have disseminated fact sheets and reporting procedures directly to our personnel that are law enforcement focused and which cover an array of topics about the virus and how to minimize the risk of exposure. Department personnel have taken stock of our inventory of disinfectant supplies and are taking steps to replenish as necessary. We have instructed our personnel to refrain from responding to medical calls involving reports of illness or flu-related symptoms unless requested, as these types of calls are best handled by medical ambulance personnel. Given the fluid nature of the issue, we are also reviewing our arrest procedures to determine the viability of discretionary custodial arrests. We have also issued a special order detailing an internal reporting system should employees become sick with the virus or be exposed to someone who has tested positive. Given the restrictions on meetings that exist at the state level, our training and court schedules are being reviewed, and we're working closely with the Mass Municipal Police Training Committee, as well as the Air District Court and District Attorney's Office to address our responsibilities on those fronts. The department is working closely with the fire department to ensure adequate and timely communication of updates regarding the pandemic and the efficient delivery of emergency services. From there, on the back, there is COVID-19 fact sheet. Fact is in quotes by design because these may not be facts tomorrow. These are, as we know, at the time this document was printed. So this will be available as a part of this release to the public as well. The hope here is that at the end of this 2.5 week period, at the beginning of April, at the end of the first week of April, that we'll have far better clarity and understanding. You know, trying to flatten the curve is the phrasing you're hearing at each of the public updates that are given on the state and federal level. The expectation is that based on analysis in other countries and other parts of our country, that without mitigation measures, you're gonna see a curve of incidents of exposure and being found to have the contracted the virus. If you take these precautionary measures like the ones proposed in this document, it's expected that you'll be able to limit those exposures and the number of people that contract the virus. And the delta between those two is the significant part that we're focusing on, trying to limit and take away that number of people from being exposed or to be infected with the virus. So it's my hope that you as a board will adopt this document, allow for its dissemination, and for it to be placed into effect effective beginning of business tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I watched the two press conferences today, Trump and Dr. Fauci.
Yep.
Did their press conference, because that question about 10 or 25 came up.
Yep.
He said that the 10 is a guidance. Whether or not you do 10 or 25, it makes no difference. And then leaving it up to the state. And I know what the press conference that the governor had, he's remaining at a 25, so they're not really going to the 10.
The interesting thing is, all of this is voluntary to a great degree. I mean, there's some teeth on things like liquor licensing, but in terms of 10 or 25, I mean, there are no teeth behind that.
It's guidelines to provide common sense to that, because, I mean, having no school, you have a bunch of kids that want to
Sure.
get together.
Right.
And I don't know if you've been driving around the last few days, Monday I saw a ton of people walking.
Sure.
Today I didn't see anybody,
Right.
probably because of the weather a little bit, but it's those, just, if you get together with 6 of our intimate friends like this,
Right.
it's been fantastic, but just be smart.
Sure.
Stay at home, do some projects, take the time. I have the advantage of working from home, so I've been doing this for 3 years now, so it's a new normal for some people, but I think this is just a smart way to, adopt what the federal and state governments are giving us as far as guidance, and just take 3 weeks to let things calm down. I hope that it is just indeed 3 weeks and not gets an extension. So I have no trouble adopting this and posting it on our website as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with that. The other thing that was at the conference today, and an interest to Mark, is that both at the federal and the state level, they're allocating masks, gloves, and face shields, and they're going to hospitals and EMS on a priority basis. So as they get them in, each state is going to delve them out from there. I don't know how the mechanisms work, but they did make that on the announcement today.
That's what we're waiting to figure out.
And
Because my biggest concern is that we start seeing an increase of flu-like calls that are potential COVID, and we run out of supplies. As long as we have protection, the risk is minimal to low, but when we run out of protection because there is none, then what do we do?
the good news, if there is any, aside from this, I had a call, my company deals with China as part of the healthcare system that we do, so they are actually back up and running for the most part. So a lot of the supplies you're getting are from Southeast Asia in the first place. I know the masks and gloves, for the most part, that's where along with toilet paper, as we've been talking about. So since we're 3 months behind now, basically. So they're starting to see the decline, and I read a study today that showed that the number of people cured is finally above the number of people infected in China. So that's the first thing, that flattening that curve, that's what the scientists want to look at, to do that. So that shows that, okay, these worked, we can start going back to normal, and the treatments are being effective. So
And just, because I said now, we've had 2 meetings of all department heads in the last 4 days. We didn't meet in this room where we'd be elbow to elbow. We met in the Great Hall, and everybody was more than a double wingspan away from each other. It seems somewhat silly, and I know some people think that there's a little bit of overreaction and overkill here. You know, the basic message that I hope people understand is it's far better to be thought a fool by overreacting than be proven a fool by not having reacted.
And we have a little bit of advantage compared to, say, Boston or even New York City, is we don't have 9,000 people piled up
Right.
in a square block.
Right.
We have 9,000 people spread over 50-some miles.
And we have the benefit of seeing what the last, 30 and 60 and 90 days have looked like in other parts of the world.
Yeah, and that's what Dr. Fauci said today, is they're using China as the template.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we haven't reached the peak
Right.
of where China was 3 months ago.
Right.
So we expect to see a lot more. He indicated that you're probably gonna look at going well beyond the 3 weeks,
Sure.
so.
Even though adopting this document tonight, it could change tomorrow.
And
It's
his
going
point
to.
says that clearly, that this is just the best that we know
Yeah.
and can do as of right now.
And which leads to one other thing, is that as part of getting ahead of this, is that we as a community need to start looking at, if this does go beyond the 3 weeks, what are the next steps we need to take? And, we've got an election coming up, and all of our election workers are elderly, they're the high-risk people. So what do we do there? We also have a town meeting coming up in the not-too-distant future, so what are we gonna do about that? So we should be putting contingency plans in place for those.
Yeah, on those 2 fronts, the MMA, the Mass Municipal Association, and the Governor's Office are working. We've had some communication from the Elections Division and the Secretary of State's office that they are trying to find a way to preserve democracy and keep democracy functioning, but to do it in a way that is consistent with the time and the date that we're functioning in. Ohio today, we talked earlier, Ohio today canceled their primary. Others have moved theirs off into June sometime. But again, if you listen to Dr. Fauci, we will likely be experiencing this probably closer to the tail end, but still into late August. So even moving things out into June isn't necessarily gonna be the answer. But as soon as we know more about our obligations regarding elections and town meetings, we'll make certain that we update the information that's known to the public. One of the benefits that the state has is that constitutionally, it can adopt a 1/12 budget. So if they don't have their budget finished in time for July 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year, they can just take a simple vote to say, we're gonna divide last year's budget by 12 and just go month to month. We can't do that legally as municipalities. There is talk right now of a piece of legislation getting pushed through that will allow that, because it's very unlikely that people are gonna be able to hold their town meetings and get their budgets passed in the normal course of business between now and June 30th. So we'll likely be looking at the ability to have 1/12 budgets until we get through the tail end of this.
Yes, Ronan?
Just talking about this made me think about, what about like hearings in the planning board that have time periods
Yeah.
associated with them where a ruling has to be made?
Yeah, we did talk about that at the department head level, and what's going to be coming from the respective staff administrators to the board, the boards proper, is going to be the recommendation that applicants that are currently in process be approached, and that an agreement to freeze the clock, hold the process until sometime in the future be arrived at. Absent being able to do that, the legislature is also working on how to handle that statutorily. Because, if you don't respond from a conservation perspective within, 21 days, planning board, you could get constructive approval if you don't, process within the timeframe.
Right.
So until we get relief from the state on these timelines, the first goal is going to be for things that are in the pipeline already, seek agreement of the party to put a hold on them.
And if they won't, we just vote.
Well, If they won't, then it becomes the discretion of the board whether they choose to vote based on the best information they have at that time, or to seek, to run the clock as far as you can, waiting on the state to give us any relief that might become available, unless until you get to the 12th hour, and then you have to make a vote, then you have to do that. But the second piece of that is new applicants, to the extent that we have the ability to not accept new applicants, that start a time clock that we not. And that goes toward the issue of not holding meetings unless they're critically important to hold, or there's a legal obligation to hold them.
But I thought I saw something about the open meeting law. You could hold meetings remotely, like you could do a Zoom
You
meeting.
can, but the difficulty with that is, right now, we don't have the technology. We talked about it very briefly, that some communities using a platform called Zoom that will allow, if there's a remote meeting taking place of the planning board, and you're having a public hearing. Right now, we don't have the ability, if we're having a remote meeting with no public access, to allow the public to remotely participate.
Well, yeah, you could. I mean, I've used Zoom for remote meetings.
That's what I'm
and
saying, we don't yet have that in place, but that's what we would need to do before we
Yeah,
could
it's-
hold those
It's
public hearings.
pretty easy though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It is, it's just adopting a piece of
I
software.
thought it was easy.
I mean,
And you can have more than 3 on the free platform, and then you just have to announce it. They need to be able to call in. I don't know if there's an upper limit to what
No.
Zoom allows in
I
any
don't think so,
single meeting.
I think Skype
it's
is the
time.
same way, yeah,
I think it's the time of the meeting that's capped
yeah.
in the free version of
And
it.
there
Yeah,
are
it's 40 minutes
and
if
there-
it's a free, but if
For
you
the free
have,
version,
if
the
you
pro
buy
you
the
want.
other, you
And there,
don't have that cap.
we haven't talked about it yet, but that's something that, we could look at purchasing a WebEx type
Right.
platform.
Right,
that-
WebEx
so,
would work,
um,
yeah.
They don't work really well when the entire country's on them, like this morning in my meeting.
Or free conference like our meeting yesterday.
Yeah, so the free ones aren't gonna get any support for that, so.
Yeah, it probably won't be free much longer.
I think it's worth the town investing in something like that, because
Absolutely.
not only do we, this temporary open meeting law piece of it, I don't know, just from my own personal experience, having to call in to a meeting in this size of room and try to hear what's going on, is quite difficult, and if there is stuff being presented, it's impossible to follow along, so. I would direct you to examine, look at options with our
Absolutely.
software provider
Yep.
to do that, so. Okay, thank you, this is very comprehensive, and I appreciate everybody's
So
input and
again,
support.
kudos to the members of staff that have, they spent their Friday and then their parts of their weekend and again this morning putting this stuff together, so.
Yep, and I know there's more to be done, so. Any questions there?
No.
Okay. 5.2 Board of Selectmen announcements.
Did you vote to adopt?
Oh, we have
Oh,
to
sorry,
adopt.
let's go back to that. Can I get a motion?
Yeah, I make a motion that we adopt the community plan as presented by Jim.
I'll second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
So that'll be posted on the website.
It'll be on the website, we'll get it out to the media and an email blast as well.
Okay. Board of Selectmen updates and reports. My only question is, I think out of the abundance of caution, we should adopt not having a meeting for 2.5 weeks unless it's necessary. If there's business that needs to be done. I did see in that open meeting law piece of it that, of emergency nature declaration,
Yep.
avoid the posting piece. Is that
Mhm.
something in there as well, or?
Yeah, and you have the ability anyway at the call of the chair to schedule a meeting. I don't see within the next 2.5 weeks, absent a new breaking piece of information regarding this plan that you just voted, that you're gonna need to meet.
Okay.
You would normally be eyeball deep in budget stuff right now. As of the last meeting, we were pretty close and pretty tight on that, so I think we're well enough situated that, once we have better clarity on if we're even gonna be able to have a town meeting, and if so, at what time, or whether we're gonna go to 1/12, I don't think there's a pressing need for you to get together on that, so absent something of critical nature coming up, I think it would be wise to set the lead. You're requesting other boards and committees not hold meetings.
Yeah, I would expect the need to lead the way here. So.
Do we want to wait then 2.5 weeks to finish up on
No, I mean, we can do that as a separate brief remote meeting.
Okay.
I just wanted to,
Yep.
I just want to go over one more thing with you about that, so.
Yep.
We can do that as soon as we need to.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
The planning board applied for and the town received the municipal vulnerability protection plan and the, or planning grant. And that is in process. We, the planning board awarded the contract at our last meeting to Weston and Smith. I think. Sampson.
Yeah.
And there's a Skype meeting on the 23rd, I think it is. I don't know, I might be wrong on that date, 23rd or 24th, next week.
Yeah.
I am assuming that that all goes forward as planned.
We did,
It's a Skype meeting. It
right, we
was-
did discuss that in the staff meeting today with planning, support staff, and the plan is to go forward with that still.
Okay,
The expectation, from what I understood, was that it wasn't going to involve a quorum of the select board and require a posting of the select board, which would be
No, no, it
required if they're
wouldn't.
on, but individual members of boards, committees that are affected or implicated in it, as well as staff, will be on that call.
okay, all right. I am assuming one of the selectmen would be included in that.
I haven't seen an invitation or anything.
Neither of you have received an invitation? Okay.
I can see what the distribution was on it.
I don't
Certain
know what
that-
it was, I was BCC'd, so.
Yeah, I was a listed requested participant, so I can forward it off. Again, I'm not certain what your time constraints are, but if you do have the time.
If you can just send it to us, then
Yeah.
make ourselves available if we need to.
Well, if it's gonna be both of you, then I would need to know in advance enough to post, so.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
can confirm that between now and that date.
Okay. 5.3 clerk of the board announcements, I don't think we have any, because there's no
Nothing.
events. All I did, the one thing I did see today is that Earth Day is canceled, so that's a shame.
For the year, till next year, yeah.
It's too bad, but I'm hoping we can start having outside events and announcements as the weather starts to get nice here. I do know that I've seen a lot of people picking up trash during their spare time, including I meant to tell the police chief today that they put something up about a young man doing that, so it was nice to see. 5.4 bills payable. Can I get a motion?
Make a motion, we sign bills payable warrant out of session.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Can we get a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion that we adjourn at 8:07.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Good night.
Good night.
Everybody.